In the quiet neighborhood of Setagaya, an old Western-style house stands apart from the modern Tokyo landscape surrounding it. Known locally as Kuroyuri Manor, the Black Lily Manor, this Victorian-inspired building has remained unoccupied for decades, its reputation tainted by whispers of tragedy and supernatural occurrences. The house is immediately striking. Tall windows that seem to watch passers-by, weathered stone walls partially hidden by overgrown vegetation, and a roof that peaks sharply against the sky. The once manicured gardens have grown wild and unruly, nearly obscuring the stone path that leads to the grand entrance. At night, locals claim to see lights flickering in windows that should be empty, moving through the house like phantom caretakers. For almost 50 years, no family has called Kuroyuri Manor home. The last residents, the Nakamura family, fled in 1963 after their youngest daughter was found dead at the bottom of the grand staircase, her neck broken at an impossible angle. According to neighborhood gossip, this wasn't the first unexplained death in the house. The Nakamuras left so hastily that they abandoned most of their possessions, as if something more terrifying than grief had driven them away. In the years that followed, strange incidents continued to surround the property. A real estate agent disappeared while showing the house to potential buyers in 1965, only to be found wandering aimlessly through Shinjuku 3 days later, unable or unwilling to explain where he'd been. He resigned immediately and moved to Hokkaido. The property was quietly withdrawn from the market. In 1971, a homeless family sought shelter in the manor during winter. Neighbors reported hearing children's laughter from within the abandoned house for several nights before an eerie silence fell. When authorities investigated, they found no one, only small handprints in the dust that led up the stairs to the third floor, ending abruptly at a blank wall. Our story begins in autumn of 1979. 5 students from Waseda University had gathered at a local izakaya to celebrate the end of their midterm exams. Toshiro, Kenji, Akiko, Mei, and Haruto, friends since their first year, were enjoying the warm glow of sake and companionship when Kenji brought up the subject of the abandoned mansion in Setagaya. "My cousin lived near that old house," he mentioned, his words slightly slurred. "He swears it's haunted by everyone who ever died there. Says they're trapped inside, never able to move on." Toshiro, always the skeptic, dismissed the story. "Every neighborhood has some abandoned building with ghost stories attached to it. I've walked past it before," Mei said quietly. "Sometimes the windows fog up from the inside, even on warm days, like someone is breathing against the glass." Akiko laughed nervously. "Don't tell me you actually believe in ghosts, Mei." Haruto, who had been silently listening to the conversation, suddenly suggested, "Why don't we go see it? Right now?" There was a moment of hesitation before Kenji's face lit up with excitement. "Perfect. Our own test of courage." An hour later, they stood before the rusted gates of Kuroyuri Manor. The autumn moon hung low in the sky, casting long shadows across the overgrown garden. The alcohol-fueled courage that had brought them there was quickly fading in the cold night air. "Maybe this isn't such a good idea," Akiko whispered, hugging herself against the chill. "We've already come all this way," Kenji insisted, pulling a small flashlight from his jacket pocket. 10 minutes inside, that's all. Then we'll have a story to tell everyone at university." The gate creaked loudly as Haruto pushed it open. They followed the broken stone path toward the house, finding the front door locked, but discovering a cellar entrance around the back. The rusty padlock broke easily in Kenji's hands. The dank smell of mildew and decay greeted them as they descended into the darkness. Toshiro bumped his head on a low-hanging pipe and cursed softly. The beam from Kenji's flashlight revealed cobwebs and abandoned furniture covered in decades of dust. "Watch your step," Haruto cautioned. "The floor doesn't feel very stable." They navigated through the cellar and found a door leading to what must have been the kitchen. Moonlight filtered through broken windows, illuminating dust particles that swirled around them. The kitchen still contained rusted pots and pans, dishes stacked neatly in cabinets, and a dining table set for a meal that was never served, a tableau frozen in time. It's like they just vanished in the middle of dinner, Mara observed, her voice hushed. Moving into the dining room, Kenji's flashlight beam caught something on the wall, a family portrait. 5 faces stared back at them. A stern-looking father, a mother with sad eyes, 2 teenage boys, and a young girl wearing a ribbon in her hair. The girl's face had been scratched out of the photograph. Someone wasn't a fan of the little princess, Kenji joked, but his laughter sounded hollow in the empty house. They continued their exploration, moving into a grand foyer with a sweeping staircase. Despite years of neglect, remnants of the house's former elegance remained: visible hand-carved banisters, ornate ceiling medallions, and fragments of a crystal chandelier scattered across the marble floor. "Listen," Akiko suddenly said, raising her hand. "Do you hear that?" They all fell silent. At first, there was nothing but the creaking of the old house. Then faintly, they heard what sounded like traditional Japanese folk music, as if from an old record player turned to low volume. "It's probably just coming from one of the neighboring houses," Toshiro reasoned, though they all knew the manor stood isolated from other buildings. "Let's check upstairs," Kenji suggested, already placing his foot on the first step of the grand staircase. As they ascended, the wood creaking beneath their weight, the music neither grew louder nor fainter, maintaining a perfect distance, as if moving with them. The second floor contained several bedrooms, each filled with furniture draped in sheets that had yellowed with age. In what appeared to be a child's room, they found toys from another era: a wooden kokeshi doll, a tin train set, and a small music box. Mei reached toward the music box, her fingers hovering over its tarnished lid. "Don't touch anything," Haruto warned. "We shouldn't disturb this place." Without warning, the overhead light flickered once, twice, then blazed to life, filling the room with harsh brightness. They froze, staring at each other in shock. "The electricity shouldn't be working," Toshiro whispered, his face pale in the sudden light. "This place has been abandoned for decades." As suddenly as it had come on, the light went out, plunging them back into darkness save for Kenji's flashlight. "That was weird," Kenji admitted, his earlier bravado weakening. "Maybe we should." "Toshiro." The whisper was so faint that Toshiro thought he'd imagined it, but then it came again, closer, as if someone had leaned in next to his ear. "Toshiro." He spun around. "Who's doing that? It's not funny." The others looked at him in confusion. "Doing what?" Akiko asked. "Someone just whispered my name." Mei moved closer to Haruto, gripping his arm. "I didn't hear anything." Akiko. Now it was Akiko who jumped, her eyes widening with fear. "There! Did you hear that?" Before anyone could respond, they all heard it. 5 distinct whispers, each saying one of their names, overlapping in a chilling chorus that seemed to come from everywhere at once. "Let's get out of here," Kenji said, his voice cracking. "Now." They moved quickly toward the stairs, no longer concerned with exploring. As they reached the top of the staircase, Mei gasped and pointed down into the foyer. Standing directly beneath the broken chandelier was a figure, a young girl in a white dress, her long black hair obscuring her face. She stood motionless, her head tilted at an unnatural angle. "Go!" Haruto shouted, pushing the others toward the stairs. They descended in a panicked rush, nearly tripping over each other. As Toshirothi, last in line, reached the middle of the staircase, he felt it, an icy grip around his ankle, so cold it burned through his jeans. He looked down and saw a pale hand with long fingers wrapped around his leg. "Something's got me," he screamed, kicking frantically. Kenji rushed back, grabbing Toshiro's arm and pulling hard. The invisible grip released suddenly, sending both boys tumbling down the remaining stairs. They scrambled to their feet and ran for the cellar door, not daring to look back. Outside, they collapsed on the overgrown lawn, gulping the fresh night air. For several minutes, no one spoke, their ragged breathing the only sound. "Did you all see her?" Mare finally asked, her voice barely audible. They nodded, except for Toshiro. who sat with his head in his hands. "Something grabbed me," he said, pulling up his jeans to reveal an angry red mark around his ankle. 5 distinct finger-shaped bruises already forming. It was so cold. "We need to leave," Haruto insisted. "Now." None of them argued. They made their way back to the train station in silence, each lost in their own thoughts. As they parted ways that night, there was an unspoken agreement. They would never speak of what happened at Kuroyuri Manor. For several weeks, life returned to normal. They attended classes, studied for exams, and tried to forget their experience. But Toshiro began to change. The bruise on his ankle didn't fade. Instead, it darkened, spreading slowly up his leg like a creeping infection. He became withdrawn, missing classes and ignoring calls from his friends. When Kenji finally went to check on him, he found Toshiro's apartment door unlocked. Inside, the air was frigid despite the autumn heat, and every mirror had been covered with sheets. Toshiro sat huddled in a corner, unwashed and unshaven, muttering to himself. "She followed me home," he whispered when he saw Kenji. "She stands at the foot of my bed every night, watching, waiting." Kenji convinced Toshiro to stay with him that night, but Toshiro insisted on sleeping on the floor, saying he no longer trusted beds. In the morning, Kenji awoke to find Toshiro gone. A note on the table simply read, "She's calling me back." 3 days later, Toshiro's body was discovered in his apartment by the building manager, responding to complaints about a strange smell. According to the police report, he had been dead for approximately 72 hours. His body was found contorted in an impossible position, spine bent backward, limbs twisted as if someone had wrung him like a wet cloth. The official cause of death was ruled as a seizure, though no medical history of epilepsy existed. Most disturbing were the words written in Toshiro's journal, found clutched in his rigid hand. "She's standing in the corner again tonight. She says the others are waiting for me at the house. She says, I need to go back. I think I will. I think I must." In the weeks that followed, the remaining 4 friends drifted apart, bound by a secret they couldn't share and a fear they couldn't name. Kenji dropped out of university and moved back to his hometown. Akiko transferred to a school in Osaka. Mei and Haruto stayed, but they avoided each other in the halls, as if seeing one another would somehow summon whatever had taken Toshiro. A year later, to the day, Kenji was found dead in his family's garden shed. Like Toshiro, his body was grotesquely twisted. 6 months after that, Akiko disappeared from her apartment in Osaka. Her case remains unsolved. Mei and Haruto, perhaps realizing they couldn't escape separately, eventually reconnected. They married quietly and moved to America, where they lived under different names. They never spoke of that night, even to each other, as if saying it aloud would give it power. The manor still stands in Setagaya today. Developers have attempted to purchase the property multiple times, but each transaction has fallen through under mysterious circumstances. The most recent attempt was in 2010, when a construction crew arrived to demolish the building. The project was abandoned after 3 workers died in unexplained accidents within the first week. Local authorities have since declared the property condemned, but no one has made any effort to tear it down. Instead, a tall fence surrounds it, warning people to keep out. Not that the warning is needed. Most locals take the long way around rather than walk past its gates. Sometimes, late at night, people report seeing lights moving through the house. Not electric lights, but the warm glow of paper lanterns, as if a festival from another time is taking place inside its walls. And occasionally, someone will report hearing music, or laughter, or the sound of children playing. But most disturbing are the reports from those who live nearby, who say that sometimes in the early hours before dawn, they see 5 young people walking up the path to the front door, 4 boys and a girl, their faces eager and animated, as if they're embarking on an adventure. They always enter. They never come out. If you find yourself in Setagaya, you might be tempted to seek out Kuroyuri Manor. Perhaps you're skeptical of ghost stories. Perhaps you think this tale is just urban legend. exaggerated over time. But before you test your courage, consider this. In 2018, a university student named Hiroshi Tanaka came across this story online. Intrigued, he did some research and discovered that the names Toshiro, Kenji, Akiko, Mei, and Haruto matched a group of Waseda University students who had all died or disappeared between 1979 and 1981. Hiroshi posted his findings on a paranormal forum, announcing his intention to visit the manor and document his experience. His last post was on the 18th of October, 2018. Standing outside the gate now. The house doesn't look as scary as I expected. We'll update when I'm inside. He never posted again. His phone was found 3 days later, on the stone path leading to the front door. The camera roll contained dozens of photos of empty rooms except for the last image, which showed a blurry figure standing at the top of a grand staircase, arm outstretched as if in invitation. What draws people to places like Kuroyuri Manor? Perhaps it's the thrill of facing our fears, or the desire to prove that death isn't the end. Or maybe, for some, it's the whisper of a voice that knows your name, a voice that promises you'll never be alone again, if only you're brave enough to answer its call. Would you answer? If you've had experiences with haunted places, or if you know more about the cursed manor of Setagaya, share your stories in the comments below. And remember, some doors, once opened, can never be closed again.